Good evening, everyone. My name is Pastor Dan Potasnik, and I serve as the Grand Canyon Synod Director of Generosity and Strategic Development. And as a synod, our mission is to communicate the love of Christ, connect diverse people, and create new ways of outreach. And in the spirit of this mission, the Grand Canyon Synod Stewardship Team is excited to welcome you to tonight's webinar and welcome Pastor Tim Brown, who will offer his teaching, How to Construct a Narrative Mission Plan for Your Community, Step by Step. Pastor Tim is a graduate of the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago and has served congregations in both Chicago and Raleigh, North Carolina. But he currently serves in the office of the presiding bishop as director for congregational stewardship support, where he creates and curates relationships and resources to help synods and congregations fuel their ministries. And so please open your minds and your hearts and your spreadsheets as we welcome Pastor Tim to the Grand Canyon Synod. Welcome.
Thanks, Dan, and good to be with you all there. And yeah, while we're on the webinar or whatnot, if you want to keep yourself on mute, that's great. But if you have questions or something, you can either put them in the chat, and Dan will be looking at those, or you can. I mean, I do welcome you to come off mute and just ask questions as things come up. So feel free to do that. And I've done this webinar in a couple of different iterations, and so I'm always looking for feedback, what would be helpful and what wouldn't. But I'll start just kind of by way of introducing myself. As Pastor Dan said, I am Tim Brown. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been a pastor in the ELCA since 2009. I served congregations in Chicago, in downtown Chicago with my first church. And then most recently, I was at a church here in Raleigh as a senior pastor. And from there, I got asked and recruited to work for the presiding bishop as the director of congregational stewardship. I said, yes, I can do that, but I can't move back to Chicago. My family would not be okay with that at this point. We kind of got embedded here in Raleigh. So they said they would make it remote. So I'm joining you from the East Coast with lots of coffee in hand. And I hope my computer won't lag. We are having thunderstorms here. My wife is a professor of biology at a little private university here in Raleigh. I have two boys. Alistair is 9 years old. He's a soccer player. His team, the Scorpions, have gone undefeated this year. We have a tournament this weekend, so we're very hopeful for that. He loves playing striker. And my son, Finley, is a baseball kid. He plays catcher for his team. He's on the Cardinals. And he'd be quick to tell you, though he plays for the Cardinals, we are lifelong Cubs fans. So don't make any mistakes there. I'm going to talk today about narrative spending plans or narrative mission plans. I use those interchangeably. I don't use the word budget, and I'm going to explain why that is in just a little bit. But I'm also going to say some things on this that I think will may kind of be interesting, and I want to follow up and explain what I mean by those. If I say anything that you're like, that doesn't, I've never heard that before. Like, for instance, I will make the claim that none of you have electric bills for your churches. You have electric bills for your homes, but not for your churches. I will make the claim that none of you actually have buildings. You have mission outposts. And these aren't just semantics. I actually mean that when I say that, because the way we talk about things is how we treat them. And so I'm going to explain just a little bit more about that as we go along. But you're going to make an agreement with me, if that's all right. And that is that if I'm ever talking about a slide that you can't see, you're going to go ahead and take the risk and say, hey, I actually can't see that. Or you're talking about something that's not on the screen. Because I won't tell you how many times I've done these sorts of things, these webinars, and I've been talking about something and people just go along with it, even though none of it's on the screen for them. I don't want that to happen. All right. Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start. But before I do, just by kind of thumbs up or raise hands, or even you can use the little icons if you're not on camera. How many of you do a narrative spending plan or a narrative mission plan at the moment? So we got a sort of, we got a yes. Janice, is that a qualified yes, or do you do one every year?
I've worked on the synods and I worked on my churches too many years ago.
Okay.
Count.
Okay. Great. Great. All right. And David, that was a kind of sort of you kind of a hybrid, or you've seen them before, but you've never implemented them, or not at this church, maybe.
Well, first, not at this church. I've been here about 5 months. I've used narrative before, and it's great for presentation to share with the congregation. But at the same time, my first church, they had a narrative budget, but no grand ledger, which was very concerning for me. So I think it's a both and, not an either or.
Absolutely. And actually, Dan, you took the lead, which is really important. The lead that I would say is a narrative budget never replaces a line item budget. All right. Or narrative mission plan never replaces the line item mission plan. You do need to have both. And I'll go into why that is, because it's impossible to construct a narrative mission plan without a line item mission plan. And if you are doing that, then you're just kind of guessing at numbers, which is not helpful for anybody, right? The narrative mission plan is actually what comes out of a line item mission. But I'm going to go to the text, and we'll figure out how to construct this together. All right, here we go. Okay. Are we seeing narrative spending plan step by step? Do we see it online? All right, excellent. I don't usually do the animations just because I go back and forth. If that's all right with everybody, you're going to see the screen behind, the work behind the screen. But we're going to talk today about narrative spending plans, kind of the whys, and then the practical hows. I'm actually going to tell you, if you have your line item spending plan in front of you, I'm going to tell you some very practical ways that you can go ahead and kind of chunk that up so that you can create a narrative spending plan out of it. I'm also going to show you a couple of examples of narrative spending plans. They don't all look the same. And this is even more true as most churches are holding their annual meetings, not only in person, but also online. So it can look very different in a number of ways. And all these slides are accessible to you. So after we're off, if you want to contact Pastor Dan, I can get him all these slides and you can see them and you can use them with your councils, stewardship teams, or what have you. All right. Thumbs up. Sounds good. Beautiful. All right, here we go. First of all, I just want to start off kind of like what David was saying. I want us to be really clear about why we're doing a narrative spending plan. So narrative spending plans tell the qualitative story, not just the quantitative story. And for a long time, churches have historically treated their spending plans, or what they called budgets, like a house budget, like your home budget. Now, this is not a rhetorical question. I actually am inviting an answer on this. What's your home budget? What is that intended to do?
Make sure I don't end up on the street.
Right. Thank you, David. Yeah. Make sure that you can live until you die, right? That's what your home budget is for. Make sure you can live until you die. What is a church's spending plan intended to do?
Keep the doors open.
Very, very, very grateful that you took the risk to answer, David. I'm going to say that's not it, but go ahead. Anybody else? See, here's the thing, David. That may not be it, but that's what a lot of people think, right?
Why I said it.
I know, and I know you don't think that. At least I hope you don't think that. A church's mission plan is intended to help them fulfill their mission. It's not like a house budget. Your home budget is to help you live until you die. But a church's mission plan is to help them live until their mission is accomplished. Which means we have to be really clear about what our mission is. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. The churches need to be very, very crystal clear about what God is calling them to do where they are. One of the ways we can kind of figure this out, at least start to figure it out, at least ask good questions around it. And I do this with church councils. I do this with synod councils. I do this with synod bishops sometimes. I say, if your church or if the synod as an organization, right, disappeared tomorrow, what would people say is missing? And not the people in the pews. I'm talking about the people in the neighborhood. What would they say is missing? When we can begin to answer that question, we can begin to see what God is calling out of us. And that might give us some sort of inkling into what a mission might be for us. So a narrative, a spending plan tells that story of the mission and how you're accomplishing it and what kind of fuel you need to do what God is calling you to do for the year. It tells the qualitative story, the impact story, not just the quantitative story. Narrative spending plans are honest about impact. They talk about how you're changing lives. They're not just honest about costs, though they are honest about that too. But here's the thing, like, we think that numbers move people. Numbers don't move people. Stories move people. At our core, we are less logical and more emotional than we even want to admit. And so if that's true, and I think it is, then speaking the language of emotion is how we get people investing into our mission. Narrative spending plans don't hide costs. They reveal mission priorities. I hear a lot of times people talk about how, well, we don't like that so much of our, and they use the word budget, we don't like that so much of our budget is spent on the building. And I said, well, I don't like that either. But what if you were talking about the fact that you don't really have a building, you have a mission outpost? This is where everything happens. And you don't really have an electric bill. You have the cost that it takes to keep the lights on after the sun goes down so that people in that AA meeting can tell deep truths to each other in a world where that's not safe to do anyplace else. Now that I'll invest in, but I don't see that when I see electric bill, right? We have to start telling the story of the truth that we're doing. What is the truth? I was working with a congregation a couple months ago, and they were trying to do a capital campaign because they said that they needed a new air conditioning unit. And they wanted to discuss what are some of the options. And I said, cool, let's do it. Let's talk about it. And they said, well, you know, our air conditioning broke, and so we need a new one. I was like, awesome. Why do you need a new one? And they looked at me kind of blankly, and they said, because ours broke. I was like, I got that. I heard that. So why do you need a new one? They said, well, because this one broke, so we need a new one. I said, you're not answering the question. Why do you need it? And eventually they got around to the truth that, oh, we need a place where kids can hear stories about Jesus without being distracted because of the heat. That's the truth. That's the truth. Narrative spending plans tell those truths in ways that line item spending plans can't. And the final one there, narrative spending plans, they're future oriented. They look to the future. They talk about what you're going to do, not just what you did. And because of that, they create excitement and energy around potential impact. All right, I'm going to stop there. First off, any questions that we have on this so far? You can feel free to go ahead on camera, or you can go off mute. Yeah, Janice?
Yeah, I'm excited to hear the future part because the ones I've worked on pretty much looked over the last budget and said what we did, sort of. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah, and I'll get to that, and I'll show you some examples of the future part. Actually, there's a whole page that I have dedicated to the future part of a mission plan that we created. But you bring up a good point. When we're doing a narrative spending plan, we're not just talking about where we've been, but we're also talking about where we're going and how we get there. Right? That's part of the idea. Other questions that are on here? All right. So step one, be really clear with everybody by why you're doing it. Also, so these points that I just said, I shared them with the council, I shared them with the stewardship team, I shared them with the congregation. I was real honest about what this was and why we were doing it. So I would say step one, get everybody on board. Get your staff on board. Tell them why you're doing it so that when somebody asks, why are we doing this? They have these points in hand. All right. So step 2, real practical. Decide the areas of impact. Ask the cocktail question. What do you do? Sometimes people use their mission statement as the way that they split up their narrative budget. You want 3 or 4 areas that you're going to have as categories under your impact. If you have any more than that, you got too many. I would say 5 at the most. But so, for instance, maybe your areas of impact are worship, learning, and service. Maybe that's what your church does. And so you're going to cut up your line item spending plan into those 3 categories, and you're going to tell the story of how you do worship and why, how you do learning and why, and how you do service and why. And then you're going to say what that impact will cost to fuel this year. Or maybe it's caring, outreach, praise, and education. Or maybe it's grace, peace, hope, and love. I mean, if you want to use something super biblical. Or maybe it's faith formation, service to the world, love of God. Whatever it is, you have to decide what it is that you all do and what you all do the best. And use that as the categories under which you're going to create your narrative spending plan. I'm going to give an example of this in just a second. But if you don't know what these things are, this is a great conversation to have with your council, great conversation to have even with your whole church. What do we do? Why do we do it? If your mission plan can certainly be impacted by your mission statement, and it should. I mean, the more you can use that mission statement over and over again, the better you are to have it internalized. This is one area that you can do that. I mean, you're going to see an example of this in a second, but any questions on how you decide what your mission categories are? All right. Well, real practical then. So you're going to take those mission categories that I just said, you're going to decide what those are, and then you're going to take your mission line item budget, and you're going to put them side by side. And like my 4th grade teacher, Miss Keller, said, you got to show your work. And you're showing your work by categorizing the things that you have decided you do the impact with the actual line item cost that you have. Here's an example of what that can look like. Here's the line item budget on the side, and here's the ministry categories. This church has decided they have 5 ministry categories: partner ministries, faith formation, worship, care and outreach, and ministry support. This last one, ministry support, by the way, not super exciting. I would probably change that. I would probably change it to sustaining ministry excellence or something like that. But then what they've done is they've taken their line item budget. St. Jude by the Butterfly Preserve has taken their line item mission spending plan, and they've color coded it, right? Anybody who's ever done any books for any church, they recognize the codes here and kind of the examples. These aren't amounts of money. These are the codes that they have in the ledger. And they've just color coded it. So worship supplies obviously go under worship. Faith formation obviously go under here. They're like, pastor, where does the senior pastor's salary go? Well, senior pastor's salary is probably rainbow colored because their salary is a little bit of all of these. The associate pastor, unless they're called specifically to like faith formation or service and outreach, they're probably a little bit of all of these. They're definitely the worship part, right? So those line items would get cut up into all these areas. But for a lot of these are kind of simple switches. You can move them over into these areas of foci. If you have those mission outpost areas, right? Building usage, as we call it, probably rainbow colored. Probably a little bit of all that goes into all these places. And I'll show an example of that in just a second. This is a really practical way that, folks, you can start today with your highlighter, take out your line item budget, figure out your ministry categories, just start parsing it up. The next step is telling the story around those things. But this is an easy way to figure out what costs go into what categories. Any questions on this or any thoughts? All right.
I lost my cursor.
No, that's okay, Janice. Go ahead.
So who would you say is doing this in the congregation?
Great question.
And is this step going to take a long time? I mean, do some of us know so little about what we're really trying to do that this is You need some lead time to accomplish.
Which is why I'm really grateful that you're watching this webinar in May.
Okay,
Because for the first time that you do this, it will take some lead time. It usually does. That being said, most of your annual meetings, most churches' annual meetings still don't happen until January, though some of them are on the spring calendar. So some of them, will happen in the spring or maybe in the fall. But most of them won't happen until January. You still have quite a bit of lead time if you're watching this in the fall. But who should do this is a great question. I usually suggest that the head of staff, if that's a senior pastor, or if that's an executive pastor, or if you're a solo pastor, you're going to be involved. I would say use your stewardship team or members of your council to be part of this. And I would say probably your treasurer or somebody who's doing your books to be a part of this.
okay.
And the more people you have in the room, I mean, you don't want 10, but if you have 5 or 6, they can actually talk about this formation, how this came about, in exciting ways and in ways that are knowledgeable. So they're not just coming, Pastor, why did you do this? Or Treasurer, why did you do this? Right? The more people you can involve, the better. Especially if you're like me. I mean, I'm director of congregational stewardship, but I'm not great with numbers. I never have been. And so I always have that other person to check my numbers, always, right? So making sure that the right people are in the room. But you definitely want to be involved, especially in that first one. And here's the great thing. Once you have that narrative budget outlining the scaffolding that's there, you can use that for year 2 and year 3 and year 4. The things that change are the stories of impact and the switching, but the categories stay the same because that's your mission, right?
Yeah, and I would just add that any one of those members can lead it.
Absolutely. Doesn't
It's
have
just
to be the pastor.
somebody that cares to get an end result can lead it. Okay, thank you. Good.
Absolutely.
Good answer.
Thank you, Janice. Any other questions on this from anybody else in the room? All right, we're going to keep on with the practical here. Because the other question that I get a lot of times is, okay, well, what about staff? They don't really fit into these categories very neatly. They don't. So what I've always asked staff to do is a self-audit. Where do you spend the majority of your time? How much do you do? In faith formation, how much do you do in worship and preparation? How much do you do in administration, or whatever the categories that you have for your mission? Do a self-audit. So ask your staff to audit their time and figure out how they split their ministries, and then you do the same. If you're on staff as the pastor, you do the same. And estimations are great. The line item mission plan, that needs to be exact. But the narrative mission plan can have round numbers. It really can. Because what you're doing there is you're giving people the glimpse, the snapshot of impact, not necessarily every little detail, which is why the line item budget or line item mission plan, to David's point, needs to be included there. I always include it at the back of the narrative spending plan. It was always there. But ask your team to audit up their time and figure out where they are and how they spend it. And then you put it into those categories. And so, for instance, if they spend 50% of their time in service ministry, and they spend 20% on worship prep, they spend 20% on faith formation, and they spend 10% on administration, then you take their salary and benefits package, or whatever that is that their line item is, you just cut them up according to those percentages. Can happen really easily and pretty quickly. And that might shift from year to year. So I would say have them do an audit every year. It's a great way to do a review too, because it doesn't matter how much time they spend in these areas. It's just a good way to get a glimpse or a snapshot. And if you have the faith formation person as their faith formation title, but they're spending a whole lot of time doing worship, might be time to rethink their title, because that's not actually the call that they're doing. Right? This is a good way to do some of that testing. Any questions on how to split up a staff time?
No,
I have
but
this.
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Could you go back to step 3?
Sure. Step 3.
Oh. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And Pastor, you can have a copy of these slides too. So if you miss anything or you're not writing it down quick enough, I know I'm from Chicago. I talk really quickly. I apologize. But we can go back and check it and redo. But even like I said, the color coding can be helpful here too, even with the staff. And like your admin doesn't just do one or two things. I mean, they help with worship, right? If they're doing the bulletin and things like that. So making sure that they do the staff audit too. It also shows that you value them. You value them enough to have them think through what their job description is and how they're spending their time. So if you do step number 4, you take that audit. Step number 5, total up your impact costs, because your impact counts literally. And you can use your congregation members to help this. That's what I was saying. Get an accountant in the room, or get somebody who loves numbers in the room. Have them help you out with what this might end up being. I'm going to show you an example of this in just a second. So this is what the line item budget next to the narrative budget might look like, or a line item mission plan next to a narrative mission plan might look like. Now, back when I was doing this as a pastor in my first church, we used budget. I would never use that anymore. I would use mission plan, because how we talk about things is how we treat them. But here we go. And this isn't the full glimpse of everything. This is some of it. But this is an example of the line item budget, right? What we took in, what our reserves were, and then what our expenses were, right? But to take that line item and actually talk about impact ministry, where we went, what we did, right? We talked about worship, learning, caring, reaching out, and we even percentaged it, which I think is cool, because it gives other folks a different glimpse if they love percentages or charts or whatnot. And we totaled up where we were going and how we were doing. Now, this isn't my church. This is an example of a church that they offered this to me. So I can't offer specifics like why were they doing this or this, right? But I can tell you that what they did is they took everything that they were doing and they split it up according to their mission. They put percentages on it and they put a $ next to it. But the $ is the afterthought. The truth lies in here, the examples, the story. And these are pictures of their community too, right? This is a very simple narrative mission plan. This is as simple as it can be. It doesn't have to be long and involved or huge. This is as simple as it can be. Any questions on what this one looks like? I'm going to show you a couple more examples. Let's see another example. So this is that same sort of idea, except they've taken the line item and they've split it across to their mission impact. So this is another example of a line item mission spending plan. But one of the reasons I included it in is because they have this category that some people ask a lot about, which is the totals from off the budget. Sometimes churches get scholarships or grants, right? Or sometimes they have other income that they raise money for that kind of just is a pass-through. So for instance, if your church does a fundraiser for Lutheran World Relief or something like that you do every year, or let's say you support a charity that's local every year and you hold a big fundraiser for it and you make this goal to raise $60,000 every year. That's not reflected in your budget, but it needs to be reflected someplace. And that's this category right here, totals from off the budget, like where it's a pass-through, where you do a fundraiser for something else, or you have a fund where folks can give to Lutheran World Relief and it goes through your church. That's a place, that's what you can add there, because what you've done is you've taken the total of the line item budget, and this is what it costs to fuel your ministry and your mission every year. But these are also pieces of your mission that you do. They're just not reflected in the budget because they're pass-throughs. They're not going to count to that. And you actually don't have to fundraise for that for costs, right? That's how much you spent this whole year in total, $738, $925, but you only had to fundraise for $536 of that, or you only had to support $536 of that through offerings. The other stuff, you were giving it away as benevolence or mission support or one of those other things. When folks ask me, how do you create a budget that reflects both what we need to do to fuel our mission, as well as some of these other grants or other pass-throughs, this is an easy way to do that. You do a totals from off the budget. This can sometimes be confusing for churches, especially how do you create that into a narrative plan? In a narrative mission plan, what you can say about this around the narration, like if you service to others, along with the outreach ministries that we do, we also every year raise $100,000 to give away to our local charities. We do it like that. That's a really exciting, and that's a way that you can include in the narrative. But when you're showing it in the budget, you don't have to fundraise for that $100,000 because you raise it outside of that, outside of the cost of operating. It's a pass-through. Questions about this, because this can sometimes be confusing for folks.
So I might call the pass-through designated funds, where what is donated is designated for the food pantry or.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And see, what you're doing there is you're telling the truth about what your ministry and mission does, right? Because you're including it in there, but you're also telling the truth about the fact that if somebody gives to a designated fund like that, well, that's not part of the upkeep of the mission outpost. It's not part of the upkeep of the salaries. It's not part of the upkeep of the worship materials or all those sorts of things, right? So it's included in the impact that you have, but your actual budget is this, not this. This is just what you spend. I mean, and it's exciting to be able to give away quite a bit of your mission or the money that you have every year. It's really exciting to be able to do that. When you show the impact you're making, that can be really exciting for folks.
Tim, I would point out on this narrative spend plan, outreach to Synod and ELCA churchwide and camps, and those are that's budgeted outreach.
Yes.
So the off the budget would be unbudgeted.
Right. If you're raising money for that, or if somebody like gives a check to, say there is a local camp and it's a person giving the check to that, not the church writing a check to it, that would be included in the totals from off the budget. But when the church writes a check to that, that's part of your mission support. That's on the budget. That's something you plan for. I always remind folks, our offerings that we give as followers of Jesus, that's not out of disposable income. We plan our generosity. We plan our generosity. It's part of our budget. It's part of, my wife and my budget. We plan it from our personal budget. And churches are the same way when they do that. They plan for their generosity. Here's another way that you can conceptualize this. And I encourage churches to include a couple of different ways to show their narrative mission plan, right? This is the line item way. We talked about the narrative way. I also like to include graphs. This is another way to show it. And this can be done easily with Excel. And I say easily only because somebody first told me how to do it. And there is somebody in your congregation that knows how to do Excel like this. I guarantee you. You got to find them, make good friends with them, take them out for coffee. And then they can take that narrative spending plan that you have. They can take the line item spending plan that you have, and they can create this so that you can see in real time, in real visuals, how you're making a difference, what the impact is. And it's not just arbitrary, right? These are the mission priorities that they chose. These are the 5 that they chose. So we're using the same ones each time. You might only have 3. You might have 4. If you have more than 5, you got too many. But does that make sense? Utilize different visuals because we have different learners. And David, back to your first point, that's always why I included the narrative or the line item spending plan as well. Because there was always going to be those 1 or 2 folks where that's how they learned, that's how they saw, they wanted to see it. So even if we had it, I always included it too, because different people learn in different ways and they're impacted in different ways. I'm going to show you another example of a narrative mission plan. And this one I really, really like. All right. Here's a church that we had, and this was in one of their mailers that they sent out leading up to the congregational meeting. And it includes things that I love. It includes numbers for the number folks. It includes narrative for the narrative folks, and it includes quotes. These are quotes from actual congregation members about how the worship impacted them, or their reflections on how it was, right? And they included, did you know? Did you know 154,000 of our $536,000 budget supported Calvary's ministry of worship? Worship is the heart center of our community. It's by thanking God in public worship and private prayer and devotion that we grab hold of the salvation God offers us in Jesus Christ, and we make it our own. There are more than 125 worship services each year. In there, we had numbers, we had impact, and we had story of why, right? And this was just on worship. They did one for all the other ones too. They did one for the faith formation, for the care and outreach, for the partner ministries. Did one for all of these. They had a page of all of them, and they would send them out leading up to the congregational meeting. It's a very cool way. And then at the congregational meeting, you know what their narrative spending plan was? This. Everybody'd seen it already. Nothing was new. They didn't have to create many different things. They created one big thing, sent it out piecemeal, and then at the annual meeting, they had it all together. It was a really, really bright idea. And, you know, confirmands here, they had pictures, all sorts of things, right? Some really cool stuff, some scriptures that related to the worship portion of it. This to me is a really, really good narrative spending plan. And this is just one piece of that example. Any questions on the things you see here? Now, they sent this out as a physical mailer, but this was also pre-pandemic. If I were doing this now, I'd send this out in an email. This graphic right here in an email. I might include it in a mailer for folks who primarily did things by regular mail, right? And that's easy enough, print it off, mail it. But I would probably do this by email, and I take pieces of this and put it on social media. You know, I do all of those tactics to get across the impact that you're making, the lives that you're changing. Questions around this? This is an actual Lutheran church in Minnesota. So this is not something I made up either.
So are these ideas you have about how to use this thing, how to send individual pages out ahead of time? Is that in the chart somewhere that this is a first? I haven't heard of these ideas.
It's not in the charts, like I'm not including it here. It is something that you can take back and kind of brainstorm, because each congregation will do this different. For instance, if your congregation is super active on social media, then that's what you're going to lean into. But if they're not, well, then an email might be the way to do it. And the way that you would do this with an email is whatever email server you're using, whether it's like MailChimp or Constant Contact or whatever it is, you can create this in a PDF document and import that into that mailer. And you can say, hey, getting a glimpse of the congregational meeting coming up. One of our mission priorities is worship. It's one of the things that we do as followers of Jesus. Here's a snapshot of some of what happened this year. And also, we're going to talk about where we're going at the annual meeting. I want to see you there. That's what I would do. Here's a pro tip about this, though. So sometimes with these sorts of things, we get into the idea that we need to use stock images. And I would say don't use stock images when you're creating your narrative spending plan or your narrative mission plan. Use real photos of real people and real ministry that's happened throughout the year. These are actual confirmation kids. This isn't some stock photo they took from 1922. Use pictures, get permission, right, of your folks, especially if you're going to do something on social media. Always have to have permission. But I would say get permission anyways, but use real ministry pictures. And somebody said to me one time, yeah, but our congregation is generally older. And so it's going to be pictures of older people. Okay. Those are people in your community. Like, why do we apologize for who we are? Let's stop apologizing for who we are. Let's be who we are. Embrace it. Embrace it, lean into it, be honest about it, and say, yeah, this is us. We're doing great things. Here it is. All right, so that was step 6. Here's step 7, but are there any questions about step 6 that we have? So this goes into what Janice was asking about. Everything that we've talked about so far has been kind of a recap of the spending plan that you've already executed, right? But here's what I think is often missing from narrative spending plans and something that you can add, and that's highlight where you're going. So let's say you had that worship thing, right? But part of what you want to do is start a new worship service. Maybe this new worship service are for people who aren't comfortable in church. So you're going to do it at another location. Or maybe you decide you want to add a contemplative service because millennials and Gen Zs are gearing more towards contemplative, believe it or not. We're listening more to the sages and Richard Rohr. And so you want to start a contemplative service. Well, that's going to cost a little bit more money because you're going to have to implement a couple of new strategies and you're going to have the doors open a little bit longer and some things are going to happen. Well, you're going to talk about that in the narrative spending plan in the future leaning part. Highlight what you're going to do, surround it with stories, that is, tell why you're doing it and make it as exciting as possible. I'm going to show you an example of this, all right? You ready? This was from my church. This was from my church in Raleigh. So this is the extra that we were asking for that year. We were increasing the budget by almost $50,000. And we were doing it in 3 primary areas that fit into the mission. So we were doing it with children because we had a lot of young families and children. And one of the things that we were doing is we were moving our 3/4 time children's director up to full-time children's director, which includes some benefits that we had to include in there, as well as some more salary. And so we talked about our children's story, and the whole theme of this year was parables. We were talking about parables and how we fit into God's parable. And so we were talking about story a lot. And we were talking about our neighbor's story. We were going to increase our giving away, our planned generosity to a couple of places, including a place that housed women in crisis and children in our space. That was going to cost a little bit more money to keep it up and feed them, right? And so we were talking about our neighbor's story. And then our future story, we had some deferred maintenance that had to happen. And so we were talking about our mission outpost. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to plan for the future with it? And so we included that number in there. But notice we didn't just include, hey, for our building, we need $28,000 more this year. Or for our charity, we needed $3,000 more. Or for our children's ministry, we need $15,000 more. Because that doesn't say anything. This is where the truth is, right? And so we made sure to include it. And we said, in sum total, it's about $50,000 more, which is just basically, about 9% more next year. Is what we're asking for. We can do this. It's exciting. And these are real pictures of us. This was for Memory Cafe, one of the cafes we had for folks who had cognitive issues and their caregivers as they aged. It was one of the coolest things we did. So including this in your narrative spending plan, though, is really important because it talks about not just where you've been, but where you're going. So if you're going to increase your budget the next year, don't just say we need to increase because costs are rising. That's not exciting at all. My costs are rising at home, right? All sorts of things. We need to increase, not because costs are rising, because we're doing more ministry, because God is calling us to do new things, because God is calling us to continue doing amazing things that impact people. And if we stop doing them, we're going to really have a loss in the neighborhood. We got to keep doing it, right? Tell the truth about what you do, not just what you're asking from folks. One of the ways that you can frame this too, especially as you're gearing up for wherever this narrative budget or narrative mission plan is going to be spoken of, is tell the story of you. I was visiting with a church. Now that I'm not serving as a pastor at a church, I can just kind of hop around, which is great. I was sitting in the back row of a church, slipped in. It was a great church, great conversation, or great congregation, and they happened to have a stewardship moment at this one. And they didn't know I was coming, so I don't know if they would have had it if they'd known. But the person was giving a presentation. He was super earnest, super eager, really nice guy. He was a little younger than me, you could tell, first time in the team. And he was talking about, well, costs are rising, and so next year's budget's going to be a little bit more. And he ends the conversation or the temple talk by saying, and so if you have an extra $5 in your pocket, throw it in the plate. Well, I go home, and later the pastor calls me and she says, "Hey, I saw you in the back row. Thanks for worshiping with us. I have a question. What did you think of the stewardship talk?" I said, "Well, they were super earnest, super eager. They did a really good job, but I was missing one really key thing." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "He never told me why he was putting an extra 5 in the plate. He never told me why he was excited. He just told me I should be excited." Your generosity will spur other people's generosity. Your generosity spurs other people's generosity. So when you're talking about the new cool things that God is calling you to do, tell why you're excited about it. What jazzes you about next year's budget or mission plan? What jazzes you about it? Why is it exciting? This is a key part that a lot of people miss in their narrative mission plans, and it needs to be included. Any questions on this part? Janice, did that answer your question about wanting to see the future-oriented stuff? Great. I'm going to wrap up here so we can have some time for questions at the end. But step 8, I kind of alluded to this before, but make it available any way that you can. As I say, people ask, is it here? It's my kids looking for Amazon packages, but it needs to be everywhere, right? It's in the mail, it's in the email, it's printed in the bulletins. We used to have them at the back for people to pick up and take home. Visitors would take them home because we were super excited about the things that we're doing. We made them into trifolds, but you don't have to do that. You can just make them into one-sheeters with one on narrative on one side and the line item on the other. Or if it's a couple of stories, all the narratives, the line item on the other side, make it available though. And make it available in color. Make it available in exciting ways, because you're reflecting the mission that God is calling you to do. It's exciting. And finally, if you want to get in touch with me, Pastor Dan obviously has my contact information, but you can reach out to me as well, tim.brown@elca.org. This is part of my call here. I'm going to show you one more thing while I have you on the line, and that's just a really, really simple mission spending plan. And this was my first one that I ever did. I can't believe I have it still. From my very first congregation. Oh, come on now. This is the part where I start talking about something that's not up there. There it is. Now, this was the prototype. I don't
Still
have
not
it
up
with
there, Pastor Tim.
You can't see it?
No, try stop sharing and then start sharing again.
There you go. Good call. Thank you. All right, let's try it one more time. Here it is. See, Pastor, that's exactly what I said to do, and you did it. Thank you very much. Does everyone see Missional Budget 2014? This was my very first one that I did. We did go back and include pictures in it. So this is just the beta version. But we had our mission statement at the top, growing a Christ-centered community through life-changing service. And we said we were going to complete it in 2014 by embracing all God's children, providing a community space and place for all the community, and serving God's people with generosity and grace. These were our 3 mission area priorities, and our total budget was cut up into each part. Now, this is a really rudimentary one. It was my first foray. It was a 2.5% increase over 2013. You have to remember, when I first came there in 2009, their budget was the biggest it had ever been, and it was at 210. So we went a lot of places in that short amount of time. But this is all to say, if you start with this is a good start. And we just grew on this. Once we had this kind of framework, we could grow on it every year. And like I said, we did include pictures, and then we include the line item budget or line item mission plan on the back. But that's all to say, remember, this doesn't have to be flashy at first. It doesn't have to be anything super polished. Just tell the story. Tell the story of what you're doing. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Happy to answer any questions that you have or thoughts, or even if you have a reflection or you're like, hey, we did this one year, is this a good idea or not? I can workshop some stuff with you. You're welcome, Pastor Jackie. And yeah, you're going to be able to have these too. I'll send them to Dan to share. Any thoughts or questions or anything? Go ahead, Janice, please.
It's me again.
No, please.
So I worked on one of these one time when we might have been using a spreadsheet that we had used in a previous year. We're trying to, it appeared things hadn't changed, and we ended up with mistakes in the formulas. And it was like, suppose amongst those people you listed, you really don't have anybody that has much spreadsheet experience. They really don't like it. They got no way to kind of sanity check the results. I mean, is a template possible, or is that a bad idea? You end up with worse problems with formulas.
Oh, no, I don't think a template is a bad idea at all. I mean, you want to start with a document that does reflect actual numbers, though. So, whatever you were using the previous year, as long as it's reliable, that's always a good place you can start. Hopefully you have a line item mission plan someplace that reflects actual numbers. If you don't, or if you suspect that they might not be accurate, every congregation has some sort of accountant in it, or they have somebody whose sister's an accountant, or whose cousin's an accountant, or whose brother's an accountant. That's a person you're going to invite in to help you do this. And this could be a good conversation starter around a congregational audit. If you haven't had an audit, and this is especially true for smaller congregations, they don't have audits as often as other ones because their numbers aren't as complex. Whether your numbers are complex or not, you want to have an audit regularly. And your Synod can usually help you identify best tools around audits and things like that. If you think the numbers might not be reliable, it's a good year to do an audit. And then you can work off of that.
It's also good governance.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Carl.
This has been very helpful, Tim, because our congregation is doing a number of these things, but I think that you've shared some ideas that we can go in and backfill some of the, be more specific. We use a lot of pictures. We use the pie chart, which I think, people understand, and we break up our budget like that. Here's pastor's time for, admin. Here's pastor's time for worship. Here's pastor's time for, whatever. We do that with all of our staff. And so, but I think the thing that's going to be helpful to me is sharing this with our director of operations and the finance committee and stewardship on how to maybe backfill and do some more, improve what we've done, what we have in place. And I think one of the things is to share with other folks is those pictures are great. Pastor Everett, uses pictures during the sermon, during temple talks, in our emails, in our Good News Network stories. Pictures, bring it home to people. They see the little, and one of the things that came up today in one of our meetings is that, still pictures are great, but we did a little video clip here sometime back, and it got people's attention. And it was just the kids walking, down to the sensory garden that we have on our property. And it just meant so much more to people. So we're going to focus on little videos now too.
I love it. I love it, Carl. And the cool thing about little videos is they show, ministry impact in action. You can see it on the kids' faces. One of the other areas or other tools that are really, really cool is not just pictures. Those are great to pull in, but get quotes. So one year our Sunday school director was like, well, they're writing, I don't know if you guys still do this for the annual meeting, but the Sunday school report or something like that, right? And oftentimes it's super numbers heavy. You're like, you had 70 kids in Sunday school this year, 22 in 7th grade, or, however it goes, or 14 confirmants, right? I said, you know what, let's get rid of that. I don't care about those numbers. What I want you to do is get quotes from 5 kids who learned something new about Jesus that they didn't know before, and that can be your report. And they said, that's the report? I said, that's the report. Because that tells me impact. Numbers doesn't tell me anything. It tells me butts in a seat. But the stories tell me something. I tell congregations all the time, if you still have those numbers in your bulletin every week about how many people are in attendance or how far behind you are in offering according to where your budget says you're supposed to be, hold up, I'm going to take a side item here. New file really quickly. This is still recording, right, Pastor Dan? Okay. Here's a little secret that nobody ever tells you, but I really want you to know. Churches, even though we're not like other nonprofits, one place that we are like other nonprofits is in the giving. And the majority of nonprofits are in the red until December. Because 20% of giving comes in December. And so if you're including the budget of where you need to be and the offering that's come in, and it's always in the red, that's not abnormal. Because what usually folks have done is they've taken the whole mission spending plan, they've just cut it up into 12ths. Well, you and I know that doing that doesn't mean anything, because at in Easter, right, whenever Easter is, March or April, we get more people in church than we do in June. And in June and July, folks go on vacation, and so they're not present anymore. And if they give in person, that offering's missing. They'll make it up in September, though, when everybody comes back, and we'll have a little spike at Christmas time, right? I mean, that's really how we should split up the offering if we're going to do it, right? And where we should be. We should do it according to those trends, not just 12-month trends. So
do that.
So take out those numbers, and instead, in that place, put a quote. Put a quote from somebody who found the choir anthem super meaningful last week. Put a quote from somebody who was impacted by the food kitchen that you have. Or put a quote from one of the kids who got to participate as an act like the first time, and you ask them, how was it? Put those quotes in, because what people do with that bulletin is they take it home. And I would rather them take home ministry impact quotes, ways you're changing lives, than how far behind you are in the budget. You know what I mean? That's part of your narrative spending plan too, because one of the cool things that you can do is you collect those quotes throughout the whole year and you stick them in the narrative spending plan at the annual meeting. Other quotes that we have here, or other questions we have here.
Yeah, Carl again. Dan, do you have my email? Seeing how I came in late, do you have my email, or do I need to share it with you down in the whatever happened to the chat?
I don't have your email, but we are going to post this recording on the Grand Canyon Synod website and newsletter. So it's gonna be public. For the slides, it would be great if you could throw your email in there and we'll get that to you.
Okay, let me find chat again. Here we go. Okay, I'll drop it in there.
And I'll share a quick story from last year. Our Synod Assembly, every Synod Assembly has tables, right? Most of them do. And our stewardship team was tasked in hosting the table for the Synod. And maybe 2 days before, I'm looking at this trifold, and it has the whole thing was supposed to be the mission plan, the narrative mission plan in large print. We had QR codes, you could go to it, and I was looking and I'm thinking this doesn't communicate anything. I don't know how I'm going to fill this space, and then I thought I'm going to develop some photos. So I just went to Walgreens and developed like 100 photos, and half of them I pulled off the bishop's Facebook. And that actually communicated where she was and the staff were and all the actual work that the office of the bishop was doing, installations, ordinations, camp, all of our partners, because it put faces to the names and organizations that are just words on a page and numbers on a page otherwise. Like I put in the chat, 65% of people are visual learners. They want to see how your mission spending plan is actually impacting people.
That's great, Pastor. Yeah. I mean, if you wonder about a tagline, changing lives, how are you changing lives? Because here's the thing, you are. And if you don't think you are, ask somebody. They'll tell you, they'll give you a quote. Or think about how it's changing your life being a part of your community. Start with you. I know we're at time. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer. It's okay. The kids are already in bed. I said goodnight. I gave high fives and kisses before this, so we're all good. Is there any other question or thoughts that you guys have, or might be helpful for you when creating a narrative spending plan? Well, then I'm going to do one thing then, if you'll allow me, and that's a, I'm a coach as well, and so one of the things that I usually do is, what's an aha that you're walking away with, or what's a question that you're walking away with, or you can even say, you know what, I'm not so sure about this. I have to think a little bit more. So, what are folks walking away with here? Go ahead, Janice. You came off mute first.
I came up with a guy on our congregations committee to do this. I had not thought of him before.
Great.
I think he's it. Yeah, thanks.
That's a great aha. Problem solving 101. Other folks in the room, if you want to share, what's an aha or a question or a walk away, or I have to think more about that.
For me, my aha is like, I loved your mission outpost.
Yeah.
We spend so much time talking about our building and all the repairs and all the upkeep, and I like looking at as a mission outpost.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of good information. My background is in accounting, so I'm used to doing budgets. I have done narrative budgets, just not like this. So
Yeah.
I was curious, I'm into my second year of ministry, so I was curious. So even this my day off.
Oh, well, thank you for joining on your day off, Pastor.
I wanted to be here, and it gives me a lot of great ideas. So thank you so much for the information.
Great. Yeah. And Mission Outpost, you're welcome to take that, use it. Some folks like using other language with it, but it's not a building. You do so much more there than that, right? Or a sanctuary, just call the whole thing a sanctuary. That could be a cool thing. David, I saw you go off mute.
Yeah, the first one, positive. Love the quote idea. I mean, the bean counters need the money, the finance. We need the grand ledgers to keep track of everything. But the quote idea, that's great to show people the impact. Pictures, I use them in sermons. I use them on MailChimp, on our e-newsletter. I'm all for pictures and videos. But the quote thing, that was very insightful. As I sit here and with the experiences I've had in this church and other churches, and a lot of people, I hear the cynics saying, well, this is just semantics. I mean, even if we said, well, how we speak about something is how we treat it. A lot of people, there are going to be a lot of people that say, well, this is all wonderful, but I'm still on a fixed income and I can't give any more. That's great. But we don't have any income to help the budget, and we have to cut costs. And I'm all for, like, again, where I am right now, we fortunately have other sources of revenue to offset that, and that's why I am where I am. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But there's a lot of churches where they simply say, well, the AC, for instance, this is Arizona. ACs are, it gets 120 degrees. I don't think there's a single person that would say AC is a luxury out here. It's a necessity.
I was there in July, I remember.
So, but they'll still say, like, we don't have the money to pay for it. In the end, we don't have the money to pay for it. So we'll close off that side of the building and be done with it, I mean, all of this is narratives are great. I get it. I'm for it, but in the back of my mind, I still get those cynics that are, it doesn't matter what you tell them. There's only so much money in the world.
I hear you. And I'll say I get that too. And it is true. I would say one of the things that I think the church can't do anymore, though, is let the cynics run the agenda. And one of the ways that we don't do that is by, we nod and we agree. Yeah, I hear you. But God's still doing cool things here. I'm really excited about it. And we go that way. When folks tell me that it's all semantics, and I get that. I work in grammar, right? Then you do the two, right? You're a pastor, you're preaching, right? I usually do a little thought experiment with them, and we can do that really quickly if you want. It might be helpful just to give you a frame that you can use sometimes. So here's the thought experiment. Close your eyes. I want you to imagine a building at the end of a cul-de-sac, all right? Can you see it in your mind? It's a building at the end of a cul-de-sac. Now keep your eyes closed, but instead of the building at the end of the cul-de-sac, actually it's my home. I tell you it's my home. How does the picture change? Now, just wait a second. Keep it close. See it still. Actually, it's not just a building at the end of the cul-de-sac. It's not just my home. It's actually where I'm raising my babies. How does it change? So, and you can open your eyes. I do this with councils all the time. I do it with bishops sometimes. What I get at with this exercise is trying to figure out how to tell the truth, not just a fact. Because all three of those were facts, but only one was true. The last one was the true one. And then I go, see, semantics change things. They do. And so even if you don't, well, and here's the thing, as Pastor Veronica was saying about your building being a mission outpost, one of the cool things is, let's say the AC goes out. It's not a luxury. You need AC to have it. Well, if it's your mission outpost, you get to ask the really important question. Is this mission outpost meeting our needs? And for some folks, it might not be. We got to switch mission outposts then. And you can ask that if you look at it like that, instead of, is it a building, right? It's a tool for ministry. How's it meeting our needs? The mission God's putting out with us. But I hear you, David. It can be a slog. And I would just encourage you to keep at it. Don't let the cynics win the day. Keep at it.
Is it kind of possible to inspire people with the income side of our ministries? I mean that like David says, you got grants, you got Thrivent cards, you've got special offerings, or you've got it's.
Yeah, look how generous we are. Look how generous you are. I mean, folks in our congregation are super generous. It's amazing. Congregation attendance has gone down, but actually giving has remained pretty level over the last 20 years. It's been amazing, which means that people are growing in generosity. It's pretty amazing. And that's a trend across the church. We've seen that. It hasn't remained level, but it hasn't gone down as much as it should have, because people are generous.
Well, in the larger church, or the sources of the grants, reflect generous people too, and we're not alone. I mean, I think that helps a lot to say to somebody on fixed income, we're not alone in this. That other people believe in what we're doing, you can believe in it too.
Yeah, we do it together. Yeah, it's great. Gail, any thoughts or ahas or things you're thinking about as you're walking away?
Well, all of this is future oriented to me. I'm a fourth year seminary student. So, I'm looking forward to doing this for the first time next year. Cool. And my background is in communications, so I think, this is kind of natural for me where the numbers part really isn't. So,
Yeah, it's a great fit. And I will tell you personally, I wish I had learned a lot of this in seminary. They weren't doing this when I was in seminary. I wish they had.
really weren't doing it when I was in seminary either, so that's why I saw the workshop and I went, this would be a really good fit for our admin class, but didn't get it there, so this is a good place to learn it.
Well, I'm glad you are. And Carl, you shared something in the chat. Anything else that you wanted to share there? Okay. Thank you all for staying. I can stick around a little bit longer, but I'm really grateful for you. tim.brown@elca.org is my email. Feel free. You can also reach out to Pastor Dan. He can get in touch with me as well. But thank you all for your time and attention. If I can help in any way, let me know, okay?
And
This is
thank
great.
you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
thank you,
Thank you,
Pastor
Tim.
everybody.
For
Thanks,
presenting.
everybody.
I'll share my aha moment and with the group that this is not just about, this doesn't end at the generosity of financial contributions. We are a congregation of disciples who give energy and time at St. John's Lutheran Church, where I'm an associate pastor. We have a work day on Saturday, which we are rebranding as our fun and coffee and donuts day. And but people are not going to show up if they're not invested in the mission and ministry of the congregation. They're not there to clean up a building that's just another building that they drive by. They're going to show up at 7 a.m. because that's the only time you can in Arizona as summer's coming, because that's a place where we welcome and feed and teach and experience Jesus. So.
Amen. That's great, Pastor. Oh, you just reminded me one thing. One more thing. One of the coolest things that you can do in a narrative spending plan or a narrative mission plan is you can take the total number of volunteer hours that people in your church do, and you can go to the IRS website and you can look what that would cost in monetary means, and you can include that. And you can say, not only are we super generous in all these other ways, but look at how amazingly generous we are in all of the ways that we use our bodies and our minds and our hearts here. And I've done that before in narrative spending plans, and it's super inspiring for folks. So yeah, you can do that too.
Well, thank you, Pastor Tim, and thank you all who joined live and who may be watching a recording of this. Thank you for your ministry and for your leadership in the church.
All right. Thanks, everybody.